Hey guys, tonight we're crawling under the desert sky with nothing but starlight, sandstorms, and a badly labeled envelope to guide us. Somewhere between Baghdad and Tehran, a fax machine sputters to life. You can almost hear the gears whining with confusion, as if even the technology knows something isn't right. A few dozen pages slide out, maps, orders, coordinates, and one lonely signature that absolutely shouldn't be there. You're sitting cross-legged in the warm hush of a war room. But the chairs are empty, the ashtrays are full, and something very big just went very wrong. Because this is the story of how Iraq planned to invade Israel, and accidentally handed the entire plan to Iran. Not through spies, or surveillance, or some Tom Clancy-esque plot twist. Nope, they literally mailed it. You probably won't survive this, if you were the guy who sent it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're tuning in from, and what time it is where you are. Always love seeing how far this sleepy little campfire reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in Iraq, sometime in the late 1980s. Saddam Hussein, shirt buttoned too high, eyes dark with grandeur, is growing more restless by the day. The Iran-Iraq war has drained him, financially, militarily, spiritually, and he's looking for the next fight to distract everyone. Israel's as convenient a scapegoat as any. Now imagine you're the guy sitting 2 chairs down from Saddam, trying not to breathe too loud. You nod at all the right moments. You say, "Yes, Mr. President," even when he tells you he's descended from Nebuchadnezzar. And you write down whatever he dreams up, because arguing isn't a retirement plan, it's a disappearance notice. You already know Saddam's got a flair for spectacle. Historians still argue whether he truly believed he could lead the Arab world by torching his enemies, or whether it was just a very loud form of overcompensation. What's not debated is that he hated Israel with a passion that bordered on performance art. He didn't just want to hurt Israel, he wanted to shock it, dismantle it, parade over it. And so the meetings begin. The plans are erratic at first. One moment, you're drafting blueprints for a missile strike. The next, Saddam's talking about a pan-Arab army marching through Jordan. There's even talk of coordinating with Palestinian fighters, though no one really checks if they're on board with the idea. Half the time, it sounds like Saddam's describing a parade float, not a military campaign. But still, you write. And it's not just generals anymore. Engineers, linguists, topographers, even food supply officers are brought in. They're told to prepare for a scenario where Iraq sends a mechanized division straight toward the Mediterranean coast. The problem? Israel's not exactly a next-door neighbor. There's Jordan in the way. Maybe Syria too. You'd need cooperation from countries that wouldn't even share a bus stop with Iraq at this point. One senior officer suggests a diplomatic approach. He is reassigned to a poultry farm within a week. So the plan, ridiculous as it is, keeps growing. You're there when the maps are inked. Real ink, on real paper. Saddam didn't trust computers. Too easy to hack. Instead, dozens of hand-copied memos, stamped and sealed, begin circulating among a carefully curated inner circle. This is where things start to go sideways. One document, let's call it Package 37, is the motherlode. It's the full outline of the proposed invasion. Routes, estimated troop movements, faked cover stories, fallback plans. It's not Shakespeare, but it's thorough. And one bleary-eyed aide, up past midnight, trying to collate 100 folders for various embassies and attachés, makes the sort of mistake you only make once. He places Package 37 into an outgoing pouch marked, Confidential Diplomatic Courier, Tehran. To be fair, Iraq and Iran did sometimes exchange documents. Not warmly, not often, but enough for the mailing system to exist. And the pouch is sealed, tagged, and, most importantly, sent. No alarms go off, no flags are raised, because everyone's just doing what they're told. And no one dares check Saddam's master envelope stack twice. The next morning, you're sipping tea in the Ministry of Defense when a junior staffer walks in. Pale and sweating, holding a carbon copy of the delivery list. "Sir, Tehran received something." You blink. Tehran what? In the pit of your stomach. You already know. You're halfway out of your seat when someone from the communications wing bursts in with a confirmation. Diplomatic clearance accepted. Package delivered. Contents signed for. The room falls so quiet you can hear the clock ticking. It's the kind of silence that smells like burnt paper and bad decisions. A general mutters something about retrieving it. Someone else suggests denial. Another mentions mystical interference. But he always says that you can't take it back. Not now. Not without making it worse. It's gone. The whole invasion plan. Sitting in an office in Tehran. Opened, or about to be opened, by men who have every reason to hate Saddam. Every reason to laugh, and every reason to weaponize that information. And the man who ordered it, still asleep. The funny thing is, historians still debate whether Saddam ever learned about the mix-up in real time. Some say he found out weeks later and went apoplectic. Others argue his inner circle buried the mistake so deep it didn't resurface until long after the war. What's certain is that Iraq never launched that invasion. But that story, we're just getting started. You're back in Baghdad, only now the palace feels hotter, heavier. The kind of heat that settles into your bones, not from the sun, but from fear. It's the morning after the envelope disaster, and Saddam Hussein still hasn't been told. You pass guards in 2 stiff uniforms, officials pretending to read files they've held upside down, and aides trying to fake calm with tea they can't keep from spilling. And there he is, Saddam, leaning back in a gold-framed chair that's more throne than furniture. He's surrounded by murals of Mesopotamian glory and the smell of imported cologne thick enough to lacquer a table. His eyes flick toward a television playing an old speech of his. He watches himself a lot these days. You already know what he's thinking. Israel, always Israel. It's his favorite subject, right behind himself. To Saddam, Israel isn't just a state, it's a personal insult. It reminds him that while he may swagger across the Arab world, there's one place he can't touch, a place protected by the West, haunted by Mossad, and irritatingly competent. And that galls him. Historians still argue whether Saddam's obsession with Israel was rooted in ideology or ego. Was he trying to rally Arab nationalism, or just outshine his rivals? Maybe both, but lately, he'd begun imagining himself not just as Iraq's president, but as the messianic unifier of the Arab world. Think Nasser, but with more statues of himself and fewer Nobel Peace Prize rumors. So, he plans, not quietly, not sensibly. He does it in grand meetings, full of generals who nod too fast and maps too wide. Every time someone suggests caution, he reminds them who crushed the Kurds, who survived 8 years of hell against Iran, who still has functioning Scud missiles and a grudge the size of Damascus. You sit through these meetings because you have to, but if you're lucky, you get to sit in the second row, where he can't see your knees shake. The plan he pushes isn't exactly a blueprint. It's more like a fever dream. He wants to bomb Israel's military hubs. Yes, but also its airports, its water treatment plants, its morale. And he doesn't just want Iraq to strike. He wants Jordan, Syria, maybe even Egypt to rise up together in a glorious wave. Spoiler: none of those countries signed up for this newsletter. The military commanders nod anyway, because what else can they do? The man's surrounded by loyalists, and most of them owe their careers to his paranoia. You can't even clear your throat near the guy without someone wondering if it's coded dissent. Still, there are problems. Big ones. Iraq's army is battered. Its air force has been overworked and undermaintained since the Iran war. Ammunition stocks are low, morale lower, but none of that fits into Saddam's vision. He sees himself on a balcony, saluting tanks as they roll through Jerusalem. The specifics can come later. So you draft the orders. Pages and pages of routes, unit assignments, projected resistance. You help design fake maneuvers along the border with Jordan, smoke and mirrors to make the plan look spontaneous. There's even a code name for the operation, Zamzam, a sacred well, because nothing says military precision like a religious metaphor. You're there when he gives final approval. He signs it with a pen allegedly gifted by Yasser Arafat, though historians still debate whether that's true, or if it just made for a better press story. The documents are then copied, sealed, and distributed in hand-delivered folders to no more than a dozen senior officials. At least, that's the theory. What really happens? Somewhere in the shuffle, your sleepy colleague, Ahmed, places one very important folder in the wrong diplomatic pouch. You remember Ahmed, always squinting, always mumbling about caffeine. That night, he was sorting folders by country in a room lit by a single dusty lamp. Tehran, Tripoli, Tunis, they all blur together when you haven't slept. So, Zamzam goes to Tehran, tucked between a trade agreement draft and an agricultural equipment invoice. The worst part? He even initialed it, somewhere in a file in Iran. There's proof that Ahmed not only mailed Iraq's top-secret invasion plan, he basically gift-wrapped it. But that's tomorrow's disaster. Today, Saddam is dreaming. You watch him pace before a mirror, rehearsing a speech to the brave Arab fighters of tomorrow. He references Saladin. Of course. They always do. He speaks of fire and honor, of the Zionist enemy, and the eternal struggle. You sip your tea slowly, silently wondering if Saladin would have sent his plans to the other side by registered mail. And yet, there's a weird confidence in the room, as if sheer volume will overcome logistics. And maybe that's the point. Saddam's leadership wasn't built on results, it was built on intimidation. Theater, fear, planning an invasion, even a doomed one, reinforces that image. It reminds the world, and his own people, that he's still a player. So you go home that night with stomach acid and 5 new ulcers. You lie in bed, thinking about the folder. You don't know it's gone yet, but something feels off. You dream of paperwork fluttering across deserts, of missiles launched too soon, of angry clerics in black robes laughing over maps they shouldn't have. And somewhere in Tehran, a clerk stares at an envelope from Baghdad with a puzzled expression. He opens it. He reads. He blinks. He reads again. Then he says something you've never heard spoken aloud in an Iranian government building before. What the hell is this? When someone finally picks up, there's a pause, a long one, then a voice, cautious and dry. We think we got something that wasn't meant for us. A courier from the Iranian interest section, tucked inside the Algerian embassy in Baghdad, is on the other end. He's polite, maybe a little nervous. He doesn't say much, just that a document arrived through diplomatic channels. Marked, highly confidential, addressed from Iraq's Ministry of Defense, and full of really interesting reading. You, still unaware of the exact nature of this trainwreck, are summoned upstairs. The minister is already red-faced, halfway through his second cigarette, pacing in tiny circles like he's afraid the floor is bugged. The fax went to the wrong country. Worse, that country, and they've opened it. This isn't just a bureaucratic whoopsie. This is a geostrategic faceplant with sprinkles on top. Iran and Iraq had spent almost a decade slaughtering each other in the mud, gas, and horror of the 1980 to 1988 war. The wounds weren't healed. If anything, They were festering. And now, Iraq had just dropped its military trousers in front of its most cunning regional rival. Historians still argue whether the envelope mix-up was truly accidental or if there was some inside sabotage. Some believe an anti-Saddam mole may have nudged the folder into the outgoing Tehran pile on purpose. But the prevailing theory is still this: simple, glorious incompetence. Meanwhile, in Tehran, that same drab envelope is now being passed from office to office like a particularly juicy rumor. You're practically in the room as high-ranking Iranian security officials unfold the pages and realize what they're holding. Not propaganda, not bluff, real maps, real signatures, real orders. You watch a man in a charcoal suit lean back in his chair and say softly, "This is, from Saddam?" And then he laughs. Because imagine the sweet, petty satisfaction. After nearly a decade of trench warfare, bombings, chemical attacks, and brutal stalemates, Saddam has gifted Iran an entire invasion plan. Not for them, but for Israel. This is where it gets spicy. Iran has no great love for Israel. Let's be honest. But they hate Saddam even more. And when someone you hate makes plans against someone you also dislike, and then accidentally gives you those plans, that's leverage. You're there when the Iranian military begins making copies. Not just for analysis, though they certainly do that. They annotate the margins with red pens, giggle at the logistics, and even spot a few troop miscalculations that would have gotten Iraqi soldiers lost in Jordanian goat country. One fringe tidbit. An Iranian officer allegedly doodled a camel with sunglasses in the corner of one of the pages. That document now lives in a closed archive, but a former aide swears it happened. Sometimes history wears sandals and has a sense of humor. But the Iranians don't just laugh. They think hard. They know Iraq is trying to position itself as a champion of the Arab cause against Israel. The West, everything. But this plan? It's reckless. If Saddam actually tries it, it could destabilize the entire region again. So, what to do? They gather in secret rooms with low ceilings and mint tea that smells like bruised leaves. You sit near the door, pretending not to listen as one of the Ayatollah's advisors leans forward and says, "Send it to the Israelis." Just like that. Because if Israel knows what Iraq is planning, they won't wait. They'll strike first, or prepare, or leak it to the Americans, or all of the above. Either way, Saddam's fantasy war becomes a dud before it's even lit. It's not just about stopping Iraq. It's about using Iraq's own stupidity against itself. Iran plays the long game, and nothing throws a wrench into your enemy's gears like watching him slip on his own oil slick. So, a message goes out, quiet, no official channels, no papers with headers, just a few hushed words passed through third-party intermediaries. Historians still argue whether it was via Syria, or perhaps an Eastern European embassy, or even a neutral businessman with oddly good Hebrew. But within a few weeks, Mossad knows everything. And that, dear listener, is where this sleepy little train switches tracks, because now the Israelis are in the loop. And they are not the type to let something like this slide gently into the recycling bin. Meanwhile, back in Baghdad, you're still biting your nails, pretending you know nothing. Every time someone mentions Tehran, you flinch. Every time the printer beeps, your heart rate spikes. And Saddam still has no idea. He's too busy preparing a speech about inevitable victory. The sun creeps into Baghdad like it's afraid to be seen. You shuffle into the ministry wearing the same suit as yesterday, because sleep hasn't exactly been a popular option lately. Word is spreading, slowly, carefully, like water leaking under a locked door, that something important ended up in Iranian hands. But Saddam, still blissfully unaware. You find yourself staring at a coffee cup you haven't touched, listening to the soft click of ceiling fans, wondering, how long can we keep this quiet? Not long, as it turns out. Because just after midday, the unthinkable happens. A request comes in from the Iranian interest section, delivered with a surprising amount of diplomacy. They'd like to return a package Iraq may have misplaced. No further explanation, just a polite, menacing smile and the kind of formality that makes your molars ache. And this is when people start to panic. Someone drops a clipboard, another pretends they've been transferred. Ahmed, the folder misplacing aide, is nowhere to be found. Rumor has it he took an unscheduled trip to Mosul. Others say he's hiding in the basement behind a broken photocopier. You don't go looking. You've seen what happens to the last guy who confused two reports. But before the return can be arranged, Tehran does something even more infuriating. They don't send the file back right away. Instead, they sit on it. They make sure you know they have it, but not what they'll do with it. And that's worse than them lighting it on fire on live TV. Meanwhile, back in Tehran, the air's got a slightly smug taste. The envelope's been passed up the food chain, and it now sits on a desk just a few feet from Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. You can imagine him peering over the top of his glasses, lips pursed, reading the title page with barely disguised amusement. It's not every day that your former enemy hands you a full-blown invasion plan against a shared regional adversary. It's like if your ex accidentally sent you their new partner's embarrassing love poem. It's personal. It's political. And it's hilarious. One senior Iranian advisor, years later, would allegedly joke over dinner. We thought it was a gift from Allah, wrapped in Saddam's vanity. Historians still debate whether Khamenei immediately ordered it passed to Israel or waited to see if Saddam would self-destruct first. Either way, Tehran understood the value of the moment, and they weren't about to waste it. So what do? They make copies, neat ones, annotated, archived, and then they start floating small pieces of it, not the whole thing, into the diplomatic ether. Jordan hears whispers, Syria catches hints, even Egypt, still riding the Camp David wave, starts to squint toward Baghdad with suspicion. It's the slow leak strategy. Death by 1,000 smirks. And you're watching Baghdad start to sweat. Because suddenly, allies aren't so friendly. You notice fewer return calls, shorter visits, more furrowed brows at regional summits. Something is clearly wrong. But Saddam isn't asking questions. Not yet. Because right now, he's too busy rehearsing a speech about regional coordination and striking the Zionist entity at its heart. He stands in front of a mirror, gesturing like a man giving orders to invisible armies. You sit 2 chairs away, praying that the folder on his desk isn't the same one Iran's currently giggling over. Here's the fun part. Saddam genuinely thinks he's winning. He believes his enemies are scrambling. He tells aides that the Arab world is awakening. He even orders a new round of propaganda posters showing Iraqi tanks rolling into Jerusalem, beneath a banner that reads, "One sword, one cause." You watch the print team hang those banners upside down. No one corrects them. But under the surface, tension, real tension. One general, usually boisterous, barely says a word in meetings. A logistics officer begins quietly shredding backup copies of the invasion maps. You hear whispers of a draft being quietly redesigned, though no one wants to say why. And somewhere in the chaos, someone decides to really fix things. An envoy is dispatched, unofficially, through backchannels, to Tehran. Their job? Get the folder back, quietly, no records, no fuss, just undo the worst diplomatic accident in modern Iraqi history. You almost feel bad for the guy. Almost. You picture him flying out under a fake name, carrying a briefcase full of antiques as a peace offering. And in Tehran, he gets a meeting, sort of. He's shown into a windowless room, where tea is served and polite conversation ensues, until someone drops the phrase, Zamzam. He flinches. The Iranian official smiles. Then the offer comes. We'll return it, if you admit it was yours. Checkmate. Because if Iraq confirms the document is authentic, it's political suicide. It'll prove to the world that Saddam planned an unprovoked war, and got caught. But if they refuse, Tehran keeps it, and starts reading passages aloud in places like Damascus or, worse, Geneva. So you return home empty-handed. Mission unaccomplished. Tea barely touched. And by the time you're back in Baghdad, Saddam is still blissfully unaware. Still talking about imminent coordination with Syria. Still quoting Saladin like it's going to fix his supply lines. You know the truth. You just can't say it. Word count. 1.072. Awaiting, continue. Download as audio. Ban da noi. Continue. Chat GPT da noi. Section 5. You sit through another endless meeting in Saddam's marble palace, staring at the crack in the ceiling that looks suspiciously like a map of Palestine. He's pacing again, this time in a military uniform so starched it could injure someone. He's waving a cigarette, not smoking it, as if ash were too disrespectful for his vision of victory. He still doesn't know. At least, you think he doesn't. That's the terrifying part. He keeps mentioning Israel's surprise, and how no one suspects what we're planning. You glance nervously at the aide to your left. He's sweating like a goat in a sauna, and wonder how long before someone cracks. Because over in Tehran, the story is getting juicier by the hour. Iran's top brass are passing the document around like the punchline of a very exclusive joke. Khamenei's advisors have taken to calling it the folder. Capital letters and all. Supposedly, someone even brought in a calligraphy specialist to frame the cover page, just for laughs. Historians still argue whether that part's apocryphal or not, but honestly, you hope it's true. It deserves to be. And now, something new. Iran has made contact with Mossad. It's unofficial, of course. No embassies involved, no diplomatic stamps. Just one of those oily, invisible handshakes through neutral ground. Could have been via Turkey, or maybe backchannels in Europe. You're not supposed to know. But you do. Everyone in the upper echelons feels the shift, the hush before a geopolitical storm. The folder is being shared with Israel, carefully, page by page, in exchange for a deeper understanding, which is diplomatic speak for we're both enemies of Saddam. Let's be frenemies for 5 minutes. You imagine the moment. Some sleepy Tel Aviv intelligence officer flips open a briefcase and finds maps of his own backyard. With Iraqi tank routes helpfully marked in red. He stares. He blinks. Then he calls in his boss. And just like that, Israel knows everything. They're stunned, of course. Not because Iraq wants to attack them. That's old news. But because of how bad the plan is. It's not just reckless, it's delusional. Saddam's strategy involves rolling through Jordan, coordinating with Syria, who hasn't answered his calls in months, and launching a simultaneous missile barrage that would require about double the resources Iraq actually has. One Mossad officer is said to have commented, "This is like trying to rob a bank by mailing them a stick of gum and hoping they hand over the money." You want to laugh, but you don't, because you're still in Baghdad. And in Baghdad, no one's laughing. You can feel the change coming. Subtle at first, an air of nervousness in the corridors. Meetings are shorter, fewer smiles, more, "Sir, I'm not sure that's a good idea." Not from you, of course. You've learned better, but even the hardliners are squirming now. And then comes the request, from Tehran. They want to discuss the return of certain misdirected documents. That phrase alone sends half the defense ministry into cold sweats. Because if they're willing to talk about it now, it means they've already used it. You sit in the back of a room as a dozen Iraqi officials debate the options. One wants to deny everything. Another suggests claiming forgery. A third proposes blaming Israel for making the plan. Somehow, that last guy doesn't last the week. And through it all, Saddam remains in the dark. Or pretends to be. Here's the thing. Saddam was many things. But not stupid. Historians still debate whether he actually suspected the breach and chose to ignore it. Or if he was so wrapped in his mythos he simply couldn't believe it. To him, betrayal was always external, never internal. The idea that his own people, his own machine, had failed? Unthinkable. So he keeps pushing forward. You attend a rally in Baghdad's Green Zone, where Saddam speaks under a giant banner of Al-Aqsa Mosque. The crowd is thick with soldiers in mismatched boots and college students who look like they'd rather be anywhere else. His voice echoes through loudspeakers. Iraq will lead the Arab world to glory. Somewhere in the audience, a pigeon poops on a general's cap. No one says a word. Meanwhile, in Israel, preparations begin. They don't take the threat lightly. Even a bad plan, executed with enough rage, can still cause damage, so Israel reinforces air defenses, scrambles intelligence networks, begins quietly alerting allies, especially the US, that Saddam is thinking foolish thoughts again. You start to hear whispers. That Jordan's king is furious. That Syria's pretending it never met Iraq. That Egypt's distancing itself so fast it's practically jogging. And in private, Mossad sends a message back to Iran. Thank you. Cold, professional, effective. You can almost see the smirk on Khamenei's face. Because he's just played the perfect move. Without firing a single shot, Iran has undermined its enemy, strengthened ties with a powerful adversary, and watched as Saddam's credibility crumbles from the inside. And you're caught in the middle. The quiet man in the fourth row. The one holding a coffee cup that never empties. The one who's seen just enough to know the whole plan is falling apart. But not enough to stop it. You're standing in the hallway outside Saddam's main office when you hear laughter. Not the forced kind, not the trembling chuckle of men hoping to survive another day, but actual, hearty, belly laughter. It's coming from inside the war room, which is never a good sign. You lean closer. Saddam is telling a joke. Something about a Bedouin, a sheep, and a failed spy. Everyone around him erupts with the exact volume of laughter required for survival. You don't laugh. You don't move. You're too focused on the folder tucked under the arm of General al-Samurai as he exits the room. It looks familiar. Too familiar. And suddenly you know, he's seen it. The one from Tehran. The folder. Which means, so has Saddam. You spend the rest of the day pretending not to notice the subtle unraveling of a dictatorship's delusion. Coffee is stronger. Doors are slammed harder. Orders are barked with just a few more syllables than necessary. And the big sign? Saddam no longer talks about the strike. He now refers to it as theoretical coordination. That's dictator speak for we've been compromised. Historians still argue whether Saddam read the entire returned document or just the parts with his name in bold. Either way, the moment is over. The dream of charging tanks into Israel has gone from a grand narrative to a grotesque joke whispered over late-night shisha. And Iran? They're not just savoring the win. They're leveraging it. You find yourself listening to intercepted broadcasts. Carefully coded radio chatter between Tehran and their foreign missions. The tone is smug. Words like containment, exposure, and leveraging of materials pop up. They know they've flipped the chessboard. They're offering small pieces of the plan to intelligence allies, just enough to keep everyone nervous and Iraq isolated. Even Moscow raises an eyebrow. But the real diplomatic earthquake comes in the form of a chance encounter between Iranian and Israeli diplomats at a UN corridor in Geneva. You weren't there, But someone who was claims the Iranian representative dropped the phrase, "Desert dreams make fragile roads," into the conversation and then winked. The Israeli smiled, nodded, and said, "We received your map. Very artistic. So now the whole region knows. And in Baghdad, you brace for impact." One of Saddam's senior advisors is retired without warning. Another is reassigned to manage fishery development in Basra, a punishment so obscure it might be worse than prison. You notice more guards in the halls, more silence in the elevators. The regime is locking down. And yet Saddam still appears in public, still gives speeches, still quotes Saladin. But now, there's a pause between his words, a flicker behind his eyes, like a man who just discovered his favorite meal gives him indigestion. He no longer trusts anyone. Least of all, the men who let his grand plan slip into the hands of his greatest enemy. You're summoned to a meeting, one of those ones without minutes or witnesses. In a small room with heavy curtains, a low-ranking official reads a statement aloud. Iraq will postpone regional coordination in light of unforeseen logistical delays. The words are chosen with care, but you know what they really mean. We got caught, and now we're stalling. But not everyone buys the act. Across the border, Israel is treating the incident like a live grenade with a sticky note that says, "Oops. Wrong war." They ramp up their readiness. They start probing Iraqi positions with recon flights. And most importantly, they leak just enough to make sure the Americans know what's going on. Which brings us to Washington. You're not there, obviously, but you can picture the meeting. CIA analysts flipping through photocopies of Saddam's fantasy war, each detail more laughable than the last. One fringe tidbit says someone scribbled, "Saddam needs Google Maps," in the margin of the US translation. No one denies it. The Americans are irritated, not surprised, just annoyed. Saddam had been a thorn in their side for years, but now he was showing dangerous signs of incompetence and overreach. That's a bad combo, like handing a toddler a loaded slingshot and pointing him toward a wasp nest. And as the regional temperature rises, something curious happens in Tehran. The Ayatollah's camp slows down. They've made their point. The folder did its job. Saddam is humiliated, isolated, and being quietly mocked from Cairo to Ankara. Now Iran pulls back. No more leaks, no more winks, just a faint air of, "We're above this now." Because when you've successfully sabotaged a military campaign by accident, there's nothing left to prove. Back in Baghdad, things go quiet. Too quiet. The posters come down, the bold speeches taper off, even the giant maps of Israel that once hung in military offices vanish overnight. One day you walk past the planning division and see them repainting a wall that used to show tank routes to Tel Aviv. Now, it's just beige. But you know Saddam isn't done. He never lets things go. He's brooding now, simmering, and a simmering dictator is like a pressure cooker with a jammed release valve. Something's going to explode. And you're just trying to stay invisible. You keep your head down. You drink your tea. You memorize exit routes. Because if history has taught you anything, it's that the worst disasters don't come from malice. They come from one tired man in the wrong room, sending the wrong folder to the wrong country. You're sitting on a dusty bench outside the foreign ministry when it happens. An unmarked envelope slides into your lap. No name, no seal, just heavy cream paper, folded with exacting precision. Inside, a brief memo, unsigned, that reads, "They know, we know, you should leave the country." You don't ask who sent it. You don't need to. The writing's been on the wall since the day the folder left the building. It's just finally arrived in your hands in paper form. Iraq's big secret, now everyone's small talk. And while Saddam smolders in silence, Thousands of miles away, two men drink mint tea on opposite sides of an olive wood table in Northern Europe. One's a liaison from Mossad, sober, sharp, speaks 5 languages like a man who prefers silence anyway. The other is from Iran's Quds Force, not technically authorized to be there. But let's not get caught up in titles. They talk, not like friends, but like two chess players who both hate the guy watching the game. This is where the real story kicks into high gear. Because Iran doesn't just send the folder to Israel as a passive gesture. No, they accompany it with commentary, context, suggestions, things like, note the vulnerability here, or, if this map's correct. These supply lines are laughable. It's not just information, it's collaboration. Historians still argue whether this moment marks the start of a strange, unspoken coordination between two sworn enemies. There's no love between Tehran and Tel Aviv, but there is a shared interest, keeping Saddam too embarrassed to move. And it works. Because Israel, freshly armed with Iraq's plans, doesn't respond loudly. They don't flatten Baghdad. They don't even raise their voice. Instead, they leak just enough to the Americans to ensure the folder is validated. And from there, they let Saddam stew. In the White House Situation Room, analysts review the folder like it's the script for a tragicomedy. Military brass snort at the idea of a 900-kilometer tank charge with untested fuel logistics and zero modern air cover. One aide writes a side note. Was this drawn by a third grader or a third-rate general? You almost feel bad, almost. But Saddam doesn't know about the leak, not yet. His inner circle is cracking. And no one wants to be the first to bring him bad news. Not in a regime where bad news often ends with you being invited to rest in a shallow ditch. Still, word gets out. One Jordanian intelligence source leaks to a Lebanese paper that Iraq's regional strategy was compromised. The phrase is vague enough to avoid a formal accusation, but precise enough for everyone who matters to get the message. Saddam calls an emergency meeting. You're in the back of the room, pretending to take notes while quietly planning your exit strategy. He looks tired, not physically, no, he still has the same ironed uniform, the same manicured mustache, but there's something hollow in his voice now. He paces as he speaks of regional betrayal, of leaks from Arab brothers, and Zionist manipulation. You know what he's really doing. He's laying the foundation for blame, because when the invasion that never happens finally doesn't happen, he'll need a scapegoat, several, probably, and you're hoping not to be one. One quirky detail you overhear. Saddam asks his advisors if it's possible to plant a fake folder into Israel next time. As if that might erase the real one. A general suggests using double agents. Another suggests gluing two folders together. He's dismissed 5 minutes later. Meanwhile, Iran's quiet diplomacy continues. They send vague signals to Gulf states, letting them know they helped prevent instability. The wording is careful, like a man handing back your wallet without admitting he picked it in the first place. And the Gulf states? They're interested. Because suddenly Iran doesn't look just like a spoiler. It looks like a regional chess master who just checkmated Saddam without firing a shot. You begin to notice something strange. Iraqi state TV stops airing anti-Iran propaganda for a few days. It's subtle, but in Baghdad, silence can be deafening. Saddam, instead, pivots his rage. He accuses foreign agitators of undermining Iraqi sovereignty. He holds a rally where the word Israel is replaced with outside enemies. He even drafts a new 5-year defense strategy that mysteriously omits any mention of the invasion plan. The folder has done its job. But the real twist? It wasn't even supposed to. Because this whole saga started not with espionage or betrayal, but with a single tired aide. Working too late. Who stuffed the wrong papers into the wrong pouch? You think about that a lot. How history doesn't always turn on great speeches or epic battles, but on weak coffee, sleepless nights, and a man named Ahmed who probably should have called in sick. And now, everyone's read the folder. Iran, Israel, the US, Jordan, probably the janitor at the Syrian consulate, who laughed so hard he dropped his mop. And Saddam? He's stopped laughing. You're called to a closed-door strategy session, again. Only this time, the doors are thicker, the guards outside look jumpier, and everyone inside has that look. You know the one, like they're sitting on a landmine, trying not to sneeze. Saddam enters late, which is never a good sign. He's not in uniform, he's wearing a cream-colored suit, the kind he saves for funerals or betrayal. You're not sure which this meeting is supposed to be. Without a word, he drops a folder on the table. It's not the one from Iran. It's a new one. Clean, neatly printed, titled, Regional Recalibration Protocol. You don't need a crystal ball to know what this is. It's Saddam's attempt to rewrite history, his way. To pretend the whole Israel plan never existed. Or if it did, it was merely a feasibility study, not an actual blueprint for regional war. He wants to pivot the narrative before anyone can hold it against him. You watch as generals nod, pretend to take notes, and hum like obedient bees. None of them dares mention the folder. Not directly, not out loud. But you can see it in their eyes. They all know. Still, Saddam keeps pushing. The new strategy is vague, filled with buzzwords like multipolar leverage, asymmetric coordination, and the ever-popular preemptive containment. It's all nonsense, but polished nonsense. The kind that looks good in speeches and disappears in practice. Historians still argue whether Saddam actually believed in this new plan, or whether it was purely performative, a psychological band-aid for a dictator who couldn't admit he'd been outplayed. Either way, the pivot had begun. But outside the palace walls, reality doesn't pivot so easily. In Amman, the Jordanian intelligence chief is reportedly furious. Why? Because he was supposed to be looped in. The original Iraq plan involved staging through Jordanian territory, a detail that, thanks to Iran's sharing spree, now made King Hussein look complicit. So Jordan goes into diplomatic damage control. Ambassadors are recalled, statements are issued. One source claims the king personally called Tehran to clarify Jordan's absolute non-involvement. Another says he just muttered, "Saddam's lost it," and poured himself a brandy. Meanwhile, Israel doubles down on intelligence gathering. They don't believe Saddam is finished, just embarrassed. So Mossad starts probing, not just Iraq's military movements, but their internal communications. You start hearing rumors of intercepted calls, decoded faxes, agents slipping into embassies under fake trade delegations. And then, the Americans act. It starts small, just a few more reconnaissance flights over western Iraq. Then satellite passes, then a quiet conversation between the Pentagon and Tel Aviv. You know what's coming. Because now Saddam isn't just a nuisance, he's a documented liability. The folder has turned him from feared strongman into the punchline of a dozen backroom jokes. And you? You keep your head down. Again. But one night, you overhear a conversation you're not supposed to. A mid-level Ba'athist whispering in a phone booth outside the ministry, speaking fast, nervously. He's going to retaliate, not against Israel, against someone smaller, easier. He has to prove something. You don't sleep that night. And you're right not to. Because soon, Saddam begins rattling sabers in a new direction, Kuwait. The first signs are subtle, economic accusations, gas pipeline complaints, Some dusted off documents about old territorial disputes. But you know the pattern. You've seen this show before. And sure enough, the rhetoric shifts. No more talk of Jerusalem. Now it's oil thieves, Zionist collaborators, economic sabotage from southern puppets. Saddam needs a win, a fast, flashy, undeniable win. He's lost the element of surprise, the illusion of regional leadership, and the last shred of mystery. So he picks a new target, one he thinks won't fight back. You stand in a hallway outside the National Assembly building, eavesdropping on military aides as they talk about pre-deployment scenarios and desert staging zones. The invasion of Kuwait hasn't started, but it's already begun. And through it all, the folder lingers. It's never spoken of, not directly, but it haunts the halls. Because everyone in the upper ranks knows, if that plan hadn't been exposed, if Iran hadn't intercepted it, if Mossad hadn't shared it, if Ahmed hadn't slipped it into the wrong pouch, then maybe, just maybe, Saddam wouldn't be pivoting south. And now? A new storm is brewing. One Saddam thinks he can control. Spoiler alert, he can't. You're standing in a half-lit operations room in western Baghdad, staring at a map of Kuwait pinned above a table where no one is drinking their tea. That alone tells you how serious things have gotten. There's no more talk of Israel. No more speeches about liberating Jerusalem. No references to Saladin. No sunset promises of Arab unity. The fantasy folder has been buried, burned, forgotten, at least officially. But you know better. You know the pivot wasn't a strategy. It was a reaction. A defensive flinch from a leader who had been publicly pantsed in front of his enemies. Now, Saddam needs to make someone pay. And he's chosen Kuwait not because of some noble cause or urgent need, but because it's easy. Or so he thinks. You sip weak coffee while a colonel points to red arrows drawn across the desert. They won't resist, he mutters. They rely on us for protection. Everyone nods. No one says what you're thinking. Kuwait isn't the real target. Credibility is. Historians still argue whether Saddam's decision to invade Kuwait was a direct result of the folder fiasco. Some claim the timeline's too tight, the motivations more complex. Others say it was a domino. Plain and simple. The plan to hit Israel failed, and Saddam needed a quick replacement to stay on top. Either way, you're now watching the second dumbest invasion plan in recent history being stapled together in real time. The first, of course, was folded neatly and mailed to Iran. One quirky tidbit that doesn't make it into most history books? The first draft of the Kuwait operation plan accidentally used the same map style as the folder from the Israel plan. Someone had recycled a template. You watched a junior officer white out the word, Tel Aviv, and scribble in, Kuwait City, with a ruler and a shaking hand. You don't know whether to laugh or cry. Meanwhile, over in Tehran, they're watching this unfold with the same expression a cat gives a slowly collapsing bookshelf. They don't have to interfere. Saddam is doing their work for them. You imagine Ayatollah Khamenei sipping his tea, reading the early reports. Iraqi tanks massing near the Kuwaiti border. Accusations of economic sabotage. Increasing rhetoric. He turns to an aide and murmurs, "This time, the Americans will take care of it." And he's right. Because by now, Washington is fully briefed. They've read the folder. They've seen Saddam's failed Israel plan, analyzed it, passed it through think tanks, and buried it under a mountain of classified notes labeled ludicrous but plausible. And now they're watching him blunder toward Kuwait like a man determined to fall down every flight of stairs in his palace. You hear whispers that Mossad briefed the CIA weeks ago, before the first tanks even left the depot. The agency knew Saddam needed a recovery win, and they knew his list of acceptable targets was short. So when the invasion begins, they're not surprised. Neither are you. August 2, 1990, Iraqi troops cross the border. The news spreads like dry fire. Oil fields seized. The royal family fled. Kuwait declared Iraq's 19th province. Crowds in Baghdad are ushered into spontaneous celebrations. Flags wave. Guns fire into the air. State TV plays martial music and footage of grinning soldiers. You stand in the crowd and don't smile. Because you know this isn't triumph, it's compensation. The folder didn't just derail a plan. It rewired Saddam's brain. The man who once fantasized about regional glory is now settling for property theft. And the whole world sees it. Across the ocean, America's gloves come off. President George H.W. Bush doesn't mince words. This will not stand, he declares. And unlike Saddam's speeches, this one comes with logistics. U.S. troops begin landing in Saudi Arabia within days. Ships move, airfields buzz, and suddenly, Iraq is back in the headlines, not as a rising Arab hero, but as a reckless aggressor. And the folder? Still floating in diplomatic shadows. Some say it's brought out again during briefings. A cautionary tale. This man thought he could take on Israel and the West. A U.S. general tells his team, waving the now wrinkled document. Then he mailed the whole thing to the wrong address. You sit in your office in Baghdad, staring at the corner where your own copy of the Israel plan used to be. It's gone now, shredded, but you can still feel it. Like a phantom limb of strategy. And here's the part no one tells you. Even after invading Kuwait, Saddam still obsesses over the folder. He asks if it was a trick, a forgery, a psychological operation. He accuses 3 aides of allowing enemies into our minds. One is arrested, one flees, one goes very quiet and becomes indefinitely reassigned. You start keeping a bag packed. Because you know how this ends. You've seen how bad plans become worse decisions. You've lived through one catastrophe born of arrogance, and now you're watching the sequel. And this one has American tanks in the 3rd act. You wake up to the sound of boots. Not marching, scrambling. You throw on yesterday's shirt and make it to the hallway just as a junior officer dashes past. A phone clutched in each hand like dueling pistols. Riyadh's locked down. He mutters to no one. They're saying the Americans brought a whole air force with them. Welcome to the next phase. Operation Desert Shield is officially in motion. The Americans are building a war machine right across the border from Iraq's newly acquired Kuwait. And Saddam, true to form, is still pretending he's the smartest man in the room. You sit in a strategy briefing with half the ministers gone. One's on leave, another's in Syria, possibly defected. The third was last seen fishing for catfish in the Tigris, though you suspect that may be a euphemism. Saddam walks in, late again, wearing the same beige suit from before. It now looks like a costume. He announces, the West will not fight. They fear another Vietnam. And the room doesn't nod. That's when it hits you. The folder is still speaking, through him. The ghost of that mis-sent plan haunts every misstep, every boast, every fragile lie he tells himself. He's convinced the world underestimates him, because he knows he was embarrassed, humiliated, exposed, and like any tyrant who fears he's been laughed at, he must now prove that he's terrifying. Historians still argue whether Saddam saw the Kuwait invasion as a distraction or a prelude. Some suggest he still hoped to return to the Israel question after securing the Gulf. Others think he knew, deep down, that his moment had passed, that all he could do now was bluff, bluster, and hang on. But here's the twist. He tries to reuse parts of the Israel folder. Literally. You're there when a general pulls up a logistical map, traced, redrafted, re-angled, but unmistakably the same framework used for the Israeli invasion plan, except now it points toward Saudi oil fields. Same arrows, same legend, different label. One aide jokes, "He's invading with leftovers." No one laughs. Meanwhile, the Americans aren't waiting. They're building alliances, massing troops, arranging press conferences with charts that look an awful lot like the ones Saddam tried to keep secret. You spot a reporter on CNN holding up a diagram of Iraqi troop positions, and for a second, you swear it's from your folder. The layout, the shading, someone's been talking. Iran? Possibly. Israel? Almost certainly. Even the Saudis, who once tried to remain neutral, now openly request U.S. protection. Because they've seen the folder. Maybe not directly, but they've seen enough versions of it whispered across embassies, faxed through backchannels, and retold with just enough accuracy to be terrifying. And yet Saddam doesn't blink. Instead, he holds a televised press conference where he compares himself to Nebuchadnezzar and threatens to burn half of Israel with Scud missiles. You sip tea, you don't even flinch anymore. He's trying to resurrect the failed plan. The plan, the one Iran unwrapped like a birthday gift. Only this time, he's doing it with the whole world watching, and no one is fooled. The Israeli government, having been handed that original playbook months earlier, is beyond ready. Their defenses go on high alert. Gas masks are distributed to civilians. Shelters reopened, and quietly, they tell the Americans, if one Scud lands on Tel Aviv, we respond. That sets off its own panic. Because now the US has to do something even harder than defeating Saddam. They have to keep Israel out of the war. Politically, strategically, with promises, tech, and the occasional shoulder massage. And what about Iran? They sit back, amused again. They issue bland statements about regional peace. They decry Saddam's reckless aggression. But behind closed doors, they're laughing. The man who wanted to be Saladin just got himself surrounded by 34 nations in a desert. You walk through the ministry one morning and see the original command room dark. Equipment's gone. Staff moved. The wall where Saddam once had a massive battle map of Israel. It's been painted over. A dusty fan hums quietly in the corner. The invasion that never happened has now become the joke that can't be forgotten. And yet, Saddam won't let it die. You hear him say it one night, in a late meeting full of tired eyes and empty chairs. Iraq was meant for more than Kuwait. I had a vision. He doesn't say, Israel. But he doesn't have to. You know what folder he's thinking of. You're thinking of it too. You're standing by the window of your dusty office when the first air raid siren sings. It doesn't startle you, not really. You've been waiting for this moment ever since the folder slipped across the border and detonated every ounce of strategic dignity Saddam once claimed. This is just the echo. Baghdad shudders as coalition jets streak across the sky, carving sound into the desert's stillness. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks at nothing. A child cries, and a soldier tightens his grip on a rifle that won't be used. Operation Desert Storm has begun. And Saddam? He's nowhere near a bunker. He's in his favorite room in the Republican Palace, on the upper floor. Surrounded by gold drapes and men who don't make eye contact. He's telling them that America will tire before Iraq yields. No one disagrees. No one mentions the folder. But you remember. Because this isn't just the result of a land grab in Kuwait. It's the consequence of a cascade of blunders. Triggered by one misdirected envelope and the chain reaction it ignited. The world has now fully aligned against Saddam. And yet he behaves as if he still holds some mystery. Some element of surprise. He doesn't. Everyone knows how he thinks. They've seen the maps. Historians still argue how much of the Israel folder ended up shaping the coalition's strategy. Some claim the logistics failures outlined in it were used to anticipate Iraq's movements in Kuwait. Others say it was merely symbolic, a reminder that Saddam's grand ambitions could be unmade by a single clerical error. Either way, Baghdad is now in the crosshairs. You spend your nights sleeping in a ministry storeroom lined with sandbags and bottled water. You've memorized the sound of a Tomahawk cruise missile, fast, low, unmistakable, each time one passes overhead. You wonder if it's heading for the building you're in, or the one next door. In the brief daylight pauses between raids, Saddam broadcasts defiance. He appears on TV in military garb, gesturing at maps like a game show host. "We are breaking their will," he insists, as bombs flatten radar stations and ammo depots. You notice the maps are suspiciously blank. Gone are the old folders, the arrows, the names of enemy cities. Now it's just vague shapes, terrain blobs, and lines that don't go anywhere. It's theater, a man speaking over the sound of his own collapse. But not everyone sees it yet. You walk into a market one morning, what's left of it, and see a crowd gathered around a portable television. People are quiet, the broadcast is fuzzy, but it's Saddam again, announcing strategic patience and unshakable Arab unity. You hear a man mutter, "He said that about Israel, too." The ripple is starting. The realization that this war, like the last one, was born not of strength, but of spectacle, not from vision, but from vanity. And that folder? It still echoes. One quirky tidbit begins floating around foreign press circles. The Mossad briefings now use the phrase, folder syndrome, to describe any overambitious plan with weak logistics. You hear one correspondent claim it's become slang in Israeli intelligence circles. Careful, they say, don't go full folder. Meanwhile, the war intensifies. Coalition forces slice through southern Iraq like scissors through soft linen. Iraqi conscripts surrender in droves. Some approach with white undershirts tied to sticks, others with tear-streaked faces, begging for water. You hear a tank commander radio in, "We're fighting ghosts." But Saddam keeps filming. More speeches, more promises, no mentions of Israel anymore, just vague threats about surprises. He says the war is turning in our favor. He says the Americans will flee. He says what he needs to believe. You're summoned to a late-night briefing. The room is dim, the walls plastered with emergency maps. A senior officer lays out a desperate plan to strike Israel with Scud missiles, an echo of that old folder's forgotten dream. The aim? Force Israel to retaliate and fracture the coalition. You blink slowly. It's not a new idea, it's a reheated one. And suddenly it clicks. Even now, even with everything crumbling, Saddam is still haunted by that humiliation. The accidental leak, the laughter in Tehran, the whispers in Tel Aviv, the copy in Langley. He's trying to reverse it, to reclaim the narrative, to remind the world that he could have done it, had he chosen to. So he fires the Scuds. Not many, not well aimed, but enough. The missiles streak toward Israel, and the world holds its breath. And Israel does nothing. They don't retaliate. Because the Americans begged them not to. Because diplomacy prevailed. Because cooler heads, those who had read the folder, understood that Saddam's desperate grasp at provocation wasn't worth a global unraveling. Saddam watches the news in silence. Then he orders more strikes, even though the launch sites are being bombed faster than they can be rebuilt. Even though his people are starving. Even though his army is surrendering by the thousands. You sit by the window, listen to the sirens, and sip cold tea. You know what this is now. This isn't a war. This is a man trying to rewrite the first line of a mistake. The war ends faster than anyone expected. One morning, you walk out onto the ministry steps and notice the air feels different. Lighter, like Baghdad is exhaling after holding its breath for too many weeks. There are no sirens, no jets overhead, no frantic shouting in the courtyards. Just quiet. Coalition forces have stopped short of Baghdad. Kuwait is liberated. Saddam remains in power, but just barely. The Americans decide toppling him would open more doors than it closes. So they let him limp away from the edge, wounded but alive. And you? You're still here, still breathing, but now everything feels unsteady. Saddam appears on television once again. No uniform this time, just a dark suit, too large at the shoulders. He speaks slowly, choosing words like stones placed carefully across a river. We have preserved our sovereignty, he claims. The enemy has been repelled. You stare at the screen. This time, no one around you claps. They just shuffle out of the room afterward, muttering about water rations and fuel prices. Because Iraq didn't win. Iraq survived, barely. But Saddam needs to call it a victory. He has to, because if he admits defeat, then he has to acknowledge what started it all. That folder. That single, absurd document that spiraled into a diplomatic disaster. Then into a regional war. Then into a humiliation so public it took the entire Republican Guard to smother the shame. And yet, the folder still exists. Or so they say. You hear whispers in foreign embassies. In the bars where journalists drink too early. In the corridors of former Soviet advisors who quietly pack their things and leave. Rumor has it, Tehran kept their original copy. Some say they even framed it. Hung it in a discreet hall inside the Ministry of Intelligence. Not as a trophy, but as a lesson. Proof. One diplomat jokes that the pen is only mightier than the sword when it's mailed to the wrong country. You smirk at that one. It's too true to be funny. Historians still argue whether any original copies remain outside Iran. Israel never confirms possession. The CIA refuses to comment. But one fringe report claims a photocopy surfaced years later in an Israeli War Museum archive. Misfiled under psychological operations. You always wonder if that was yours. But back in Iraq, a new campaign begins, not of war, but of forgetting. Overnight, entire shelves of documents are removed, whole offices repainted, hard drives wiped, typewriters destroyed, a quiet purge. You watch as men in suits go from building to building, asking only one question. Did you ever see the Israel plan? If you say no, they nod and leave. If you say yes, well, you don't say yes. You bury your copy. What's left of it? Beneath a floor tile in your flat. Wrapped in plastic, just in case. You're not sentimental, but part of you thinks it deserves a resting place. Like a fallen soldier no one's allowed to mention. And then comes the oddest part. Saddam begins rewriting history out loud. He gives a series of internal speeches, never broadcast, but always attended, where he describes Iraq's war efforts as having deterred Zionist aggression. He implies, without saying directly, that Israel was the real objective all along, and that they were spiritually defeated. It's Orwellian, ludicrous. But it catches on. Because people are tired of bombs, of failure, of uncertainty. They're ready to believe in a story where Iraq struck fear into the hearts of the West, even if the only thing Iraq managed to send was a mistake wrapped in brown twine. You hear a university professor explain to his students that Saddam chose not to attack Israel because he foresaw the American trap. You bite your tongue so hard you taste copper. This is how myths are born. Not from truth, but from exhaustion. And yet, deep down, you understand it. Because admitting what really happened That a dictator's most sacred military plan was accidentally gifted to his enemy is almost too embarrassing for history to carry. It demands a rewrite, a myth, a new narrative that buries the facts like your folded papers under the floor tile. But for you, it never quite disappears. Every time a radio crackles, you remember. Every time a general walks by with too many medals and too little confidence, you remember. Every time you hear someone mention strategic foresight in the same breath as Saddam's name, you remember. And you wonder, how many wars start not with malice, but with paperwork? How many grand disasters are born from someone rushing a deadline? And how close did we come to an entirely different war, one that might have ended not in Kuwait, but somewhere far more flammable? You close your eyes, and you see the folder. It's 1992 now. You're older, quieter. There's a deep fatigue behind your eyes that no amount of sleep seems to fix. The kind that only comes from watching a country try to erase its own reflection. Saddam's still in power, but the empire is threadbare. Sanctions choke the economy. Electricity flickers on and off like a nervous pulse. Stores are half empty. Pharmacies trade aspirin like it's contraband. The people whisper louder than ever before, even though they smile more cautiously. It's like living inside a balloon stretched too tight to pop. And yet, he still talks about Israel. In speeches, in poems, in murals painted on school walls. We kept the Zionists at bay, he says, even as trucks carry wheat in from Jordan and cooking oil from smugglers. His cult of narrative has grown baroque, looping, dreamlike. We won by never striking. We are feared because we showed restraint. You'd be impressed if it wasn't so pathetic. You know the truth. You saw the folder. And you know, now more than ever, Saddam's grip on reality is paper thin. You sit in briefings where officers pretend to update non-existent military readiness against Israel. You even see new maps drafted, clean, perfect borders, ideal fuel routes, imaginary alliances. It's the same plan as before, but redrawn with better handwriting. No one intends to follow them. It's theater for one man. A national stage play performed for a dictator and his ghosts. One evening, you find yourself walking past the old planning office, the one where the original folder was born, packed and mislabeled. The door is sealed now, dusty, but you stop anyway. You stare at it for a long time. And then you laugh. Because there, etched faintly in the corner of the frame, someone had carved 3 initials. AHM. Ahmed, the aide who made the fateful mistake. The man who, intentionally or not, changed the entire course of Middle Eastern history by mailing a war plan to its target. Historians still argue over Ahmed's fate. Some believe he fled to Syria. Others insist he was quietly disappeared in a purge shortly after the Iran leak. A third, more poetic theory claims he became a teacher in Mosul, where he instructed children in geography and never spoke a word about maps. You hope that last one's true. It would be the perfect ending. Because while Saddam spins myth and martyrdom, somewhere out there is the man who accidentally saved Israel, who humiliated Iraq without firing a shot, who proved that no matter how much a tyrant yells, history sometimes mumbles. And now? The folder lives on as rumor. Foreign diplomats mention it over cocktails. Scholars debate its existence in think tanks. One Canadian journalist claims to have seen a blurry copy of it behind glass at an undisclosed NATO facility. Another says Iran used it as leverage in secret negotiations about oil concessions. But Baghdad? Baghdad forgets. Or pretends to. New ministries rise. New faces appear in the news. There's talk of reform, of resistance, of sovereignty. But no one dares bring up the plan. Not even to mock it. because they all remember what followed. A mis-sent folder, a failed invasion, a pivot to Kuwait, a world war narrowly avoided, and a man who has spent years rebuilding the illusion that none of it ever happened. You begin writing notes at night. Just scribbles, dates, names, memory anchors. You tell yourself it's just for you, but a part of you wonders, what if you're the last one who knows the truth? What if, one day, history swallows the myth whole and forgets there ever was a folder? What if some future scholar writes a glowing thesis about Saddam's strategic restraint and never realizes it was built on a clerical error and a padded envelope? So you write. You write to remember. Not to avenge, not to accuse. Just to remember. Because the world already forgot the moment Saddam gave up his dream of conquering Israel, not on the battlefield, but at the post office. You don't expect the call. Not after all these years. You're sipping weak tea under a dying ceiling fan when the phone rings. A line you thought had been disconnected during the 1993 ministry streamlining. It clicks twice before a quiet voice, clipped and calm, says, "Are you still in possession of any original planning materials?" Your hand stiffens. You don't ask who they are. You don't say yes, you just ask, "Why now?" They pause. Then, there's interest in the folder again. Among the archives, among your friends, and your enemies. Click. Just like that, silence again. You stare at the receiver for a long time. You buried the only remaining fragments of the folder beneath your apartment floor a decade ago. Not because you're brave, not because you're planning to leak it to some foreign power, but because you couldn't bring yourself to destroy it. Because it still matters. To you, anyway. See, Saddam's regime is beginning to rot from the inside, and everyone knows it. The sanctions have ground Iraq into bone and dust. The party men still smile and salute, but their suits hang looser, and their eyes flicker toward the exits. And yet, even now, the folder lives. In whispers. In deflections. In subtle glances exchanged whenever the Israel file is mentioned at policy meetings. Which is almost never, except once, 2 weeks ago, when a new deputy minister, young, American educated, wearing a Rolex, said, "We should never repeat the mistakes of the '89 folder." You dropped your pen. So did half the room. Saddam, of course, has never acknowledged it, not publicly, not directly, but he knows. You've seen the way he reacts when others talk of betrayal, of lost advantage, of premature exposure. His jaw tightens, his hand fidgets with his collar, his voice, usually a measured growl, becomes brittle. Historians still argue about his reaction when the leak first occurred. Some say he paced his office all night, chain smoking and muttering about Iran. Others believe he fell completely silent and ordered a 3-day purge of mid-level aides. Still others claim, though no one can prove it, that he tried to replicate the plan from memory, but failed, and burned the drafts himself in his private furnace. You believe that last one. Because once, walking past the ministry incinerator, you saw a half-charred page with unmistakable arrowheads pointing westward and the ghost of a typed word beneath the ash. Golan. A small fringe theory has even emerged among exiled Iraqi officers in Jordan. They claim the folder wasn't a mistake, that Ahmed deliberately sent it to Iran. Disillusioned by Saddam's madness, hoping it would prevent a catastrophic war. They say he was a secret pacifist. You knew Ahmed. He once spilled coffee on your uniform and apologized for a week. He was no pacifist. But he was careful. And maybe, just maybe, he'd seen enough to want to stop what was coming. Maybe the folder was more than a blunder. Or maybe it was just what it always looked like, an accident that unraveled a regime. You still get chills thinking about it. How one man in the wrong office at the wrong hour managed to shift the gravitational pull of an entire region. How a folder sent to the wrong address told Iran more about Saddam's thinking than a decade of war. And now? Now you're older. You walk more slowly. Your files are hidden behind a loose plank and a bookshelf that no longer holds books. And you've stopped trusting the ministry to pay your pension on time. But you still remember every line of that plan. Every arrow. Every coordinate. You sometimes trace them in your notebook absent-mindedly, only to tear the page out moments later and burn it. Not because you're afraid of being caught, but because, deep down, you fear it might still work. Despite everything. Despite the collapse of the regime. Despite the failure in Kuwait. Despite Desert Storm and sanctions and silence and 10 more years of misery, you fear that, somehow, that plan could still tempt someone. Someone younger, angrier, more reckless. You once told a friend in the intelligence office, "There's only one thing more dangerous than a bad idea. It's a forgotten bad idea. Rediscovered by someone who thinks it's new." The next day, he gave you a new lock for your door. And now the phone is ringing again. You don't answer. You don't need to. You already know what they're calling about. The regime collapses in April 2003. You watch it on a grainy television in a dim cafe with broken windows and chairs stacked like barricades. There's no cheering, just stunned silence, like the country collectively forgot how to breathe. On screen, American Marines wrap a chain around Saddam's statue in Firdos Square and pull. It falls slow. Face first. Like a man bowing to history. You set your tea down and whisper, not to anyone in particular. So that's the last chapter. But it isn't. Because you know the war ended in public, but not in memory. And somewhere under your floorboards, wrapped in old cloth, the folder still waits. In the chaos, ministries are looted, memos burn, paintings are ripped off walls, people steal desks, refrigerators, light fixtures, but no one looks for the documents, not the real ones. The kind that whispered things before the bombs fell. You slip home during curfew, step over the remains of a checkpoint, and lift the floor tile. There it is. Still dry, still legible. Your copy. You unfold it with trembling fingers. Not because you expect to use it, but because part of you still needs to see if it was real. If the past decade, the war, the pivot to Kuwait, the lies, the silence, had actually emerged from this. And it had. The plan to strike Israel in phases. The list of target cities, the logistical estimates, the coded orders, the optimistic timetable, with final victory expected in 7 to 10 days. The last page, handwritten, bearing a signature that was never supposed to be read outside that room. Saddam's. Historians still argue whether Saddam ever truly gave up on the dream. Some say he died believing he'd been betrayed by fate. Others insist he knew, deep down, that it was over the moment Iran saw the folder. That everything after that, the grand speeches, the Kuwaiti invasion, the Scud missiles, the bunker broadcasts, were just reruns. You believe the truth is messier. He never let go. He couldn't. Because letting go meant admitting that one piece of mail ruined him. And now here you are, standing in the remains of your apartment, holding the proof of a moment when history turned on an envelope. There's a knock at the door. You freeze. A foreign voice, British, maybe American, says, "We're with the Provisional Authority. Do you have any documents relating to Ba'ath Party planning from 1988 to 1991? You say no. Because what else can you say? You thank them, you shake their hand, you offer tea, They don't stay long. And when they leave, you stare at the folder again and realize something you never let yourself believe before. It should not survive you. So that night, you walk out into the courtyard with a small iron bowl and a lighter. The air smells like dust and diesel and jasmine. You sit on a cracked stool, unfold the plan one last time, and begin feeding it to the fire, page by page. Each sheet curls and blackens, the paper hissing quietly as ink turns to ash. You burn the arrows, the maps, the signatures, even the faded carbon copy of your original memo that started it all. The flames dance briefly, then vanish. And when you're done, there's only silence. No cheers, no vindication, just stillness. The story ends here, not with war, not with peace, but with one man sitting under a broken sky, letting go of the thing that history refused to carry. You breathe in the smoke and close your eyes. And you feel lighter. You go inside, lock the door, and sleep. For once, without dreams. The fire is out now. The air has cooled. Whatever burden the folder once carried, its weight, its threat, its ghost, has finally dissolved into ash. Like so many forgotten wars, so many plans scribbled by men who thought history would wait for them. You feel the dust settle. And all around you, Baghdad is quieter than it has been in years. The helicopters have stopped circling. The sirens have faded, and in that rare lull between endings and beginnings, there is space to breathe, to think, to remember, softly, without flinching. Let it go now. The folder's gone. The war it could have started didn't happen. The war it did help start is over. And you're still here, still breathing, still capable of choosing silence over spectacle. So let your mind ease back from the heat of the fire. Let your breath slow. Let the desert fade into soft sand. Let the sound of the city blur into background hum. You did your part. You kept the memory. You told the truth, even if only to yourself. Now it's someone else's turn to carry history forward. Someone with clearer eyes, steadier hands. For now, though, you rest. You drift. You sleep. Because the folder is gone, and the world will go on without it. And you've done enough for one lifetime. Good night.